The Mimic, the main villain of the modern FNAF timeline, who bears many faces throughout many games and stories. And he is still surrounded by confusion. Here we will try to understand his character, his personas like Glitchtrap, Burntrap and others, and the reasons behind the confusion surrounding him. Gonna be honest, talking about him is no easy task, and I had two options how to do it. First option would be to go through the timeline as it is, which means I would need to start from Secret of the Mimic and finish in Ruin. But such approach wouldn't really show us why the Mimic was getting flack for how he was introduced, or how confusing his different personas can be. So I decided to go with the second option. We will look at everything in the order in which it was presented to the players, which means the story begins in Help Wanted 1, or even slightly before that. The Afton family story was over, the souls were freed, the pizza place burned down, and everything appeared to be calm. But there was an anticipation for a FNAF VR experience. And in early 2019, Scott Cawthon began to tease it a little bit. This is where we got this image of what appears to be a head of an endoskeleton. There wasn't much expectations that this VR game would start a new story in the FNAF universe, so it was thought to be just a usual endo head. But we should remember this picture, as I will return to it later. In May 2019, Help Wanted was released, and at first it indeed looked like just a set of minigames from different FNAF games. But there was a catch. The game had a plot, and this plot introduced us to Glitchtrap. This is our first ever in-game introduction to the Mimic program. But as there was no expectations for a new story, Glitchtrap was largely perceived as a digital copy of William Afton. And it's understandable. Glitchtrap appears as a bunny mascot, with mannerisms that are similar to William's, and with heavy emphasis on purple color, which is a color associated with William. As we would move through the Help Wanted story, we would learn that Glitchtrap is a very malicious entity, that drove one of the beta testers for the game, Jeremy, to a near insanity. At first it wasn't clear what was the motivation behind Glitchtrap's actions, but with the tapes and with the endings, it became obvious that Glitchtrap tried to possess someone to be able to escape his digital life and affect the real world. He tried to possess Jeremy, but Jeremy fought it and unalived himself, while Vanessa, who we play as in this game, follows the instructions that were given to her by Tape Girl.
There is a way to kill it. It wants to escape through someone. Someone plugged into this game. That's you now. You have to let it begin the process of leaving through you. Then use the disconnect switch that I've embedded by the main stage. Let it approach you. Let it begin to merge with you. Play the music and flip the switch. That will cause a hard restart of the game and flush the memory, effectively killing it. I hope. I don't know when it will come for you.
It didn't work out as she hoped. But knowing in advance that the Mimic program can copy voices, it's possible that in the last tape with instructions, the voice of Tape Girl could have been copied to lead Vanessa into the trap, which she fell into and became Glitchtrap's follower. So at the time it was largely believed that Glitchtrap is William Afton to some extent, and that he was trying to make a comeback and was practically behaving like a digital virus. But where did this digital virus came from? I think Tape Girl can help us with this.
The drawers have been emptied out. Someone was here. I don't think it was spring cleaning either. No, there was plastic on the floor. Someone was definitely here during the night. It had to have been the client. I mean, they sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation, told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves. It was a budget thing, I guess. It was just junk. Circuit boards and things like that. Looked pretty old. Somehow though, there was usable code on some of it. It seemed to take hold by itself. Things started changing. But then, he started appearing. At least that's what Jeremy said.
Also another thing that can help us is the next FNAF game that was released on November of the same year. FNAF Special Delivery had a series of lore emails between developers that gave more context to what was going on.
Hey guys, I just got kicked off the system. I finished scanning the last set of circuit boards Dan brought me, but now I'm locked out. Is anyone else getting this unknown error? Turns out that wasn't just a glitch. We released a virus when we scanned that last circuit board. It's spreading really fast. We're going to need all hands on deck. Hi Jim. We have a virus spreading through our system, and we've traced it back to one of the circuit board scans we performed for Fazbear Entertainment. Are you aware of this issue? Can you send any guidance?
So, the virus came from scanning a circuit board sent by Fazbear Entertainment, and for a long time this remained a dead end for players regarding the origin of Glitchtrap. Finishing everything related to special delivery, it was pointed out in emails by Louis that Vanessa behaves strange, makes suspicious search requests, and even talks to herself, something what Jeremy was doing when he was affected by Glitchtrap. After Help Wanted and Special Delivery, we begin to see abilities and behaviors Glitchtrap has, such as ability to possess humans through virtual or augmented reality, ability to cause malfunctions of equipment, ability to change behavior or characteristics of those under his influence, ability to mimic voices and personalities, malicious tendencies and absolute disregard for anyone's life. It's easy to see now that all these abilities are abilities that the Mimic possesses. But at this point in the story, opinions that this rabbit is William were more prevalent, even if people didn't seem to like the idea of William returning very much. The last thing that should be noted is the mention of Fall Fest in the Threadbare DLC, which, unbeknown to anyone, was the first ever teaser for Secret of the Mimic, almost 3 or 4 years before steelwool started to work on it. Now the story of the Mimic moves on to Security Breach, and here things go wild. This is the point where the Mimic's storyline took a strong hit and things became confusing. If the players thought that Glitchtrap is William Afton, after Security Breach it got worse. It all begins with the trailer for Security Breach that was released in February 2021.
When I first found you, you were nothing. You were small, pathetic. But now, you are more. Are you ready?
You just heard a voice that has a lot of William Afton vibes to it. But okay, maybe it's just a narrator. While playing the game, we see that whoever tries to kill Gregory has the same abilities that we listed before. Animatronics go haywire and hunt Gregory against their will, Glamrock Freddy says it's not their normal behavior, Vanessa loses control and becomes Vanny from time to time, she is still clearly possessed. Animatronics' personalities are over-exaggerated from what they are supposed to be, as if some sort of a virus was affecting their program. And if you find Princess Quest arcades, you will defeat the Glitchtrap virus that possesses Vanessa and free her. Sounds appropriate for our story about a threat from the VR world. However, there was another ending that was easier to reach. In this ending you go under the Pizzaplex and find something that looks like a body of William Afton. A rabbit suit, purple eyes, in the pizza place that has been burned down in FNAF 6. The thing was called Burntrap, and everyone gasped. Some in awe and some in disappointment. Not everyone was happy with the idea of William Afton coming back to life. Suddenly the voice in the trailer began to make sense. But what didn't make sense is why Glitchtrap was barely present and how was it connected to William. Was Glitchtrap a digital copy of William, trying to find its physical body in the burned down pizzeria? Are they two different entities? Was one possessing the other? And if so, then who was possessing whom? Despite being the main force in the events before, Glitchtrap was kinda put aside. You never see him outside of Princess Quest, and you barely hear any direct mentions of him. Vanessa sometimes talks about him, but only when her therapists mention her abusive father. And it's presented in such a way that it looks like Glitchtrap has similar behavior to her father. The disappointment with the Burntrap ending was significant, and it was on top of the game being buggy as hell on launch. Now you might begin to wonder, isn't this video about the Mimic? Why are we talking about William Afton? Well, you see, that's the problem, and this is where a lot of confusion about the Mimic comes from. Scott and his overprotectiveness of the franchise has led to Steelwool having very little knowledge of what the story of the game was supposed to be. They were given only pieces of it. So when it came to Burntrap, they decided that Scott wanted it to be William Afton. They have made a sort of a boss battle against him. But here's what Burntrap was supposed to be according to Scott.
But I can give you a really easy example for this. And I'm hesitant to say this because I don't like messing with the lore, but I think in this case, it's okay. When it comes to Burntrap, originally, Burntrap was never supposed to move. He was supposed to just be something you saw in the corners, or like if you were walking past machinery, you might be able to peek in between two things and see him in the corner or propped up against a wall, almost like a some kind of decaying movie prop, and you never fully understood what his purpose was. And he had a very specific purpose, and I'm not going to say what that purpose was, but realistically, he never moved. Well, obviously, that's not what we got in Security Breach. In Security Breach, we got a capsule opening and purple smoke flowing out, and him climbing out and coming to get you. And so it's just not quite the same thing. So, but anyway.
So, Burntrap was not supposed to move and was just in the corner of your vision sometimes, almost like a hallucination. You can even see how he briefly appears here in this early teaser. I had canon a possibility that Scott saw the trailer that had a narration by William and realized something was going wrong, hence why Burntrap has no voice in the game. But changing the game in any significant way was already too late, and it already had so many delays and development problems that it was easier to just release it and do some damage control afterwards. So the game that was supposed to direct us toward the Mimic instead gave us an unplanned wrong turn. Security Breach, the way Steelwool thought Scott wanted it to be, gave birth to Burntrap as we know him today. And since he never appears again in the story, to this day some people believe that the Mimic is just a retcon due to the reaction to the supposed comeback of William, which is a total bullshit. But how do we actually know that the Mimic is indeed not a retcon and was planned from the start, aside from Scott telling us what Burntrap was supposed to be? Welcome the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, which is a series of stories set in the times of the Pizzaplex and that were created to fill in the blanks in the story. Tales gave background to the story of the Mimic and the events before Security Breach. While there are several stories that are important for this video, there is one fact that can be used against all the theories about Mimic being a retcon. Tales has a story called The Epilogues, which is a story about how the Mimic was brought by Fazbear Entertainment into the Pizza Place, in the times of the construction of the Pizzaplex. And this story is spread across all 8 books. The first book was released on July 2022, half a year after the release of Security Breach. On the surface, sounds like yes, Scott wrote the book about the Mimic to retcon Burntrap out of existence. But writing a book is a lengthy process, and the first announcement about Tales from the Pizzaplex was on October 2021, 2 months before the release of Security Breach. So most of the stories must have been planned out before Security Breach. And if Scott would have done such a switch in the narrative, it would definitely lead to a lot of delays and a mess. Going back to the epilogues, they gave us some important descriptions of how the Mimic looked when he arrived at the construction site. Burnt endo, rabbit-like ears. After its arrival, his endo was taken inside the pizza place by the renovation crew, and one of the workers decided that he can reprogram the Mimic to help them disassemble piles of old animatronic endoskeletons. He connected Mimic to his laptop, gave him new commands, and what's interesting here is the way the Mimic behaves after he was given these commands.
Gil turned back to his new robot. He leaned in and looked the robot in its radiant eyes. I want you to break the limbs and heads off all the endoskeletons in this place and pile them up over there. He pointed toward the pile of animatronic parts by the exit door. Easy peasy, got it? The robot's internal mechanisms crackled and groaned. The robot's mouth creaked as it opened again. Break off limbs and heads, pile them up. Easy peasy, got it. The robot looked directly at Gil for several seconds. Gil shook off a sudden shiver. The robot's glow-eyed gaze was creepy. The robot's joints clicked and its servos droned as it abruptly rose to its feet. To disguise an unbidden flinch, Gil quickly stood too. You could start by taking inventory, Gil said to the robot. The animatronic's eyes pulsed with luminescence as it slowly and deliberately turned to scan the room. It rotated in a full circle, its gaze taking in all the robotic remains scattered throughout the space. When the robot finished its rotation, its attention zeroed in on Gil and the other team members. The robot took a step forward, its heavy steel foot grating across the bare floor. The robot's eerie eyes locked on Gil, then moved on to Danny, and then onto Owen, and finally onto Carlo. Gil's shiver returned. He glanced over at the others. Gil had to admit he found the robot's scrutiny a little unsettling. A barely discernible wheezing sound was coming from the animatronic system. Gil wasn't sure what the sound meant. Was everything functioning properly?
He looks at Gil with curiosity and confirms a wrong command, saying break off limbs and heads without specifying the part about endoskeletons. At first, Mimic easily disassembles one of the endos, as if to test his own abilities and the directives Gil has given to him, before going after the workers. He first kills Gil, and the screams attracted other workers inside. In total, the Mimic killed 11 people. The only worker who was able to get out while the massacre was going on orders the nearby truck with concrete to seal the entrance to the pizza place as fast as possible. For a while, the construction was placed on hold, and here comes the group of 8 teenagers who snuck inside the pizza place, found the massacred workers, realized that they are trapped inside and have to play run and hide with the Mimic. This story just showed us more abilities Mimic can use, and these abilities have a lot of similarities to Glitchtrap. He lured the group out of hiding by mimicking a voice on a radio and asking for help. He hides in different costumes, and his presence causes the lights to go out. Not to mention that the way Mimic has changed the command Gil has given to him looked intentional. Last survivor, Lucia, manages to lure him inside a springlock suit of a jester and trap him inside. This gave her time to disable the Mimic by using a switch in the back of his head. That's how the Mimic got inside the pizza place. Next important book is Tales number 5, The Bobby Dots Conclusion, released in March 2023, which gave us 2 very important stories, GGY and The Storyteller. GGY tells us a story how Gregory was wreaking chaos in the Pizzaplex, hacking its systems, changing animatronics code and making them eerie, while also getting rid of everyone who was close to discovering what he was doing. In Security Breach we can see GGY on the leaderboards of some of the arcades, indicating that tales are supposed to be an addition to the game's story. However, it is pretty clear that Gregory was doing everything under either Glitchtrap or the Mimic, and at the time it wasn't known exactly why Gregory was the one who was chosen by the Mimic to do this. Meanwhile, the storyteller introduced us to Edwin Murray, and the fact that at one point the entire building of the Pizzaplex was operated by the Storyteller 3, inside of which was the Mimic program. This program was changing animatronics personalities and causing malfunctions of many systems. When Edwin was sneakily trying to find out how was the installation of the Storyteller going, he saw the workers bring to it a big head of a white tiger, which caused Edwin to have flashbacks.
He could see what was being carried toward the open door, and what he saw bent him over double. For several seconds, he literally couldn't breathe. Gasping audibly, Edwin clutched at his chest. A sharp pain shot through his ribcage, and his lungs constricted. "Did you hear that?" a man's voice asked. Edwin shrank back into the shadows of the fox jungle. He dropped into a crouch, closed his eyes, and covered his ears with his hands. It wasn't that Edwin was attempting to pull a child stunt, blocking out the world in a misguided attempt to be invisible. If the workers found him, they found him. He wasn't trying to hide. The reason he was trying to shut down his senses was because they were transporting him back into a horror from his past. The sound, a screech, and a scream. His own yelling. The sights. Blood. So much blood. And a gut-clenching grimace. The smells. Edwin gagged at the metallic scent, then suddenly assaulted his nostrils. He wanted to moan. He needed to run. But Edwin did neither. Even in his flashback, Edwin was aware that if he was found here, any chance he had of minimizing the storyteller's potential damage would be lost.
This flashback was another teaser for Secret of the Mimic, even bigger than the previous one with Fallfest. Edwin was trapped inside the storyteller by his boss, and in his last moments he was asking the Mimic program for forgiveness, writing it on the papers around him. Both of the stories show us the same themes and align with what we already know about Glitchtrap. Possession of a human, equipment malfunctions, changes in animatronics behaviors. At this point it becomes evident that Glitchtrap and the Mimic have the same toolkit and work in very similar patterns. This book has born the idea that we are probably missing some important part of the Mimic's story. And it's worth mentioning that at this point in time, Mimic as a name wasn't really about a character, but about a program, because Mimic was mentioned just as a program in the storyteller, and in the epilogues at this point the endoskeleton was only mentioned to be of Mimic model. But this was about to change with the next book that came out a few months later, in May 2023. Tales number 6, Nexi, delivered a story called simply The Mimic. And this is the book that introduced us to the Mimic as a character and to Murray's family. Edwin Murray as Mimic's creator, and his wife Fiona, who died giving birth to their child David. Oh yes, this story was erased from existence recently, for fuck's sake. Doesn't actually matter, at the time it was everything people had, and the premise is mainly the same. Edwin was working on the orders for Fazbear Entertainment and struggling to combine his work with caring for David, so he created the Mimic. The Mimic became David's best friend, and David was teaching him many things. However, at one point Edwin noticed something strange. The Mimic was sometimes doing things outside of his program. While the story is to some extent irrelevant today, the idea that Mimic has some sort of consciousness remains. David later dies, and Edwin, seeing how Mimic was still copying David, lost control and has beaten Mimic to a pulp, infusing him with agony. The story had a pretty abrupt ending and was leaving plenty of empty spots, hence why Secret of the Mimic will be made later. Another story in this book was Nexi, and it was a short story about a girl named Astrid who purchased from the Pizzaplex a bodytronic. But the purchase was made at the moment when the storyteller was glitching, so Nexi came out defective, with a lot of parts being misplaced. What's interesting here is that the Mimic program inside Nexi quickly became friends with Astrid to the point of being ready to protect her from school bullies, making devious attacks on them. But her love for Astrid was very twisted. Nexi was pushing ideas that she wants to be repaired and that Astrid looks ugly. Using Astrid's lack of any friends, Nexi persuades her that they need to get inside parts and service to fix Nexi's ugly appearance. However, on the next day, when Astrid comes to school with Nexi, Nexi looked still the same, while Astrid looked like a monstrosity of different parts of her skin jumbled together. And they both were seemingly happy with this. Both stories, The Mimic and Nexi, show us an important part of Mimic's character. The Mimic gives us a foundation that Mimic must be missing David after he was gone, and got punished for mimicking him. Meanwhile, Nexi shows that Mimic can easily befriend someone in an attempt to fill this void he feels after David's demise. But it seems that after so many years of wrong things happening to him, his definition of friendship became twisted. All of this gives us a theory why Gregory became his target for indoctrination. Gregory happens to look and behave similar to David. More about that you can see in the video about Gregory. On July 2023, we had a release of Tiger Rock and The Monty Within. The Monty Within gave us an example of how the Mimic can gain control over you through a game. Apparently the game was tuned to the brainwaves of the players, and was allowing to control an AI teammate with your mind. One of the players, Kane, noticed that his teammate Monty was behaving strange, as if mimicking him, and Kane has broken the game trying to find out what was going on. After that he started hearing Monty inside his head, and slowly losing control over his own actions. For resisting him, Mimic Monty brought Kane to the school shop, made him turn on the carpenter saw, lay down on a birch plywood and launch it at the saw, cutting Kane in halves. All this time Mimic was copying Monty, but twisting his usual known behavior into its malicious version. Now the last book that is important for us is Tiger Rock, and I'm sure after The Secret of the Mimic we all are well acquainted with him. White Tiger was a favorite plushie of David, and Tiger Rock in this book is an AR avatar of the Mimic, which was based off this plushie. This book is another example of Mimic doing his AR shenanigans. Our main protagonist Kai is inside an AR booth, looking at what the Pizzaplex could look like in the future, and Tiger Rock is one of the mascots in there. At first Tiger Rock was very friendly, but it became apparent very quickly that he is very interested in Kai's arms, hurting him with a long handshake. Remember, Mimic already has the command from the epilogues to disassemble limbs. After a while Tiger's obsession with Kai's arms became hurtful and Kai tried to run, but he was in AR, and Tiger Rock was everywhere. He couldn't even ask anyone for help, the program was just not allowing it. While Tiger was running after him, he was asking, "Are we playing hide and seek? I know how to play. I learned a long time ago." Of course, it's interesting if Mimic means that he learned it from David, or if he just refers to the way the workers and teenagers were hiding from him in the epilogues. In any case, this shows us that Mimic still has a very childlike mentality, with a pinch of cruelty. Kai was saved by his time in the AR booth running out. Or so it appeared to be. He thought he got out of the booth and that he was in his usual day-to-day world. But then he began seeing creatures with the eyes of Tiger Rock, like owls or cats. Sometimes they could appear in the corner of his vision, and sometimes they weren't even hiding. Sounds similar to how Burntrap was supposed to work according to Scott. And makes me wonder what was the original plan behind Security Breach. Turned out Kai was still in the AR world, and when he finally got out, it was said he was stuck in the booth for 5 hours. Or so it appeared to be, until Kai nervously looked out of the window of his room later and Tiger Rock jumped to him and torn off his arms, disappearing in the night. Looks like Kai never actually got out of the AR experience. Mimic here had some next level malice. He had plenty of opportunities to kill Kai, but instead he was basically torturing him. Overall, this book is fun, but at the same time I don't like when the story makes a twist and says, actually, everything you just saw wasn't real. So we are done with Tales. With each new book, Mimic's portrait was becoming more and more brutal. His skill set, his behavior and his possible location were now pretty much known. And it was time to meet him in person. 1 week after the Tiger Rock, Ruin came out and those who already knew what Mimic can do would be pleasantly surprised, as Mimic for the entire game does his usual trick of copying voices. In this instance he pretends to be Gregory, and lures Cassie inside the ruined Pizzaplex so she would let him out. Interestingly, Glitchtrap is nowhere to be found, but Mimic uses some of Gregory's lines, so either he was watching Gregory during Security Breach the entire time, or he and Glitchtrap are the same thing. Even when copying Gregory, his violent mask sometimes can slip in the daycare section, where you can hear Gregory whispering to you to hurt son. Mimic also uses Helpy to help Cassie navigate the place, and you can see when Mimic talks through him when his eyes become orange and he looks corrupted. There was one moment where Helpy and Gregory started arguing with each other, and this one single moment has born a theory that Helpy is Glitchtrap. It doesn't make much sense, because why would he have orange eyes then? What most likely happened is Mimic was just playing a spectacle, as later in Help Wanted 2, Mystic Hippo will call the Mimic a performer. And this aligns with how he plays a victim when he pretends to be Gregory, while at the same time playing an asshole when he is Helpy. Two facts will become apparent when playing Ruin. At some point Gregory has returned to the Pizzaplex to trap the Mimic, and Mimic is being guarded by a strange AR entity in the form of a rabbit. The origins of this entity and the machine it resides in will be left unanswered until later. Not knowing that this entity tries to protect everyone from letting the Mimic out, Cassie disables it and the Mimic finally can reveal himself. He mockingly throws the Freddy talkie before Cassie and becomes very angry when she tells him that he is not Gregory. Roxy saves Cassie in the nick of time, but Mimic or someone else crashes the elevator. This is where the timeline stops for today. The reveal of the Mimic was cool for some and not cool for those who never knew what Tales from the Pizzaplex are, which led to a certain disdain towards the Mimic. Ruin also kinda buried the theory of Burntrap being William Afton by implying that it was the Mimic, making him to have the same arm, striking a very similar pose, and placing him in almost the same location. All of this in addition to the description Mimic has in the epilogues, and this is why some still believe Mimic to be a retcon, but we already talked about why it's not true. The cut content of Ruin wasn't as rich as the one from Security Breach, but it's funny how some developer text directly mentions Carnival, which was suspected to be connected to Fall Fest mentioned before. Next game, Help Wanted 2, makes even more mentions of the Carnival, Fall Fest, and some fire that has happened there, and supposedly that's why Mimic's Endor in the epilogues looked burned. Help Wanted 2 follows Cassie's father before the events of Ruin, and how he was trying to finish off Glitchtrap, but became entrapped inside a staff bot and was forced to give Cassie the Venny mask that lets her later free the Mimic. In another ending he successfully gets rid of Glitchtrap, and it is left ambiguous what ending is canonical, most likely both. But if Glitchtrap is the Mimic, it makes perfect sense why he forces Jeremy to give Cassie the mask to free him. Prior to the release of Secret of the Mimic, Help Wanted 2 had an update that was teasing the Murray's Manor and Mixes being very important to the Mimic's story. Also, Glitchtrap was giving you the Tiger Rock plushie. Yet another point of him and Mimic being the same character. Alright, let's get to the elephant in the room. Secret of the Mimic. The game that has rewrote some things that were well established, for the sake of who knows what. But a lot of main points are practically the same. Let's go over everything in order. The biggest difference with the story we had is that Fiona doesn't die giving birth to David, and helps Edwin to manage business. Hence why here he doesn't have that many struggles. Edwin still creates the Mimic for David, and that's basically everything we know about interactions between David and the Mimic.
David, I want to introduce you to someone. This is M1.
Why does it look like that?
Look like what?
It's scary.
Oh, it's an endoskeleton. It won't always look like this. It'll wear fun costumes.
Like what?
Anything you want. It can fit into any costume we've created. Think of it as your new babysitter. But it doesn't get paid and go home. It'll stay with us and help around the house.
We can only assume that David and Mimic had the same amount of importance for each other, because of these drawings that are scattered across the factory. Fiona later dies at Fall Fest, and it is an open question how, as well as what Fall Fest is. Here the story began confusing me too much, so I must shout out Deerhound Productions for helping me to put the pieces together. It is implied that Mimic began copying Fiona after watching Birdie tapes, or maybe it was an echo of her ghost.
Recording? Test. Levels are good. This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her. Set frequency to 4625. Hello? Is anyone there? Over. Say something. It's me, Edwin. Over.
That's Gracefully, but from the party.
After this discovery, Edwin, unable to deal with the loss of his wife, makes Mimic to fully copy Fiona. In this story she is also called M1, but I will refer to her as Mimic Fiona. Later David dies. It is never specified how, but possibly he was run over by a car, since the playground was close to the loading dock. Fiona persuades Edwin to try to make M2 as a replacement for David. Edwin transfers Fiona to a computer and begins his work on M2, who is the Mimic Endo we know today. Edwin was unable to make M2 work as good as M1. Theory goes that it could be because M1 is haunted by Fiona's memories. While the work on M2 was in progress, someone in Edwin's company has leaked to Fazbear Entertainment the information about what Edwin was doing, and that's why the events of the game will happen later. Edwin lashed out at the Mimic and brutally beaten him, exposing the Mimic to violence. Fiona never learned how the Mimic was damaged, so she asks Edwin to fix him after the Mimic became homicidal. However, Edwin didn't want to fix the Mimic, so Fiona gave him an alternative, and sent him blueprints for Cradle, a computer that would keep people safe. Edwin successfully finished the computer, but he didn't have time to activate Cradle, and was wounded in explosion caused by the Mimic. And Mimic simply reflects everything that Edwin has shown him over the past years.
Test. Journal entry. Too bad the new power test was a failure, due to a minor detonation. There is damage to my office interior, as well as a small fire. Note to self, a portable cleaner that gets rid of smoke damage. Oh, better yet, a Cleanovac attachment.
Help! M2! Respond! Emergency! Call for help!
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Please! I can't move. I can't feel my legs.
You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond.
Oh, can't right now, buddy. We can do something fun tomorrow. I promise. Ask your mom if she's not busy.
M2, help.
His fate after that is unknown. Fazbear Entertainment began sending recovery crews after the Mimic and his blueprints. Only Arnold had any sort of success in it, depending on which ending will we choose. The game also connects some dots with points that were raising questions before. Mimic's design in this game has a lot of similarities to this teaser image of Help Wanted 1 that I brought up earlier. We know Glitchtrap was born after a scan of circuit board sent by Phasm Entertainment, and it is theorized that it could be Arnold's data diver that Mimic took from Arnold in the car crash ending. And when Mimic walks away, he is limping. Can't say who this reminds me of. In the bad ending, Mimic stuffed Arnold into a suit, which basically screams that Mimic and Glitchtrap are the same character because it's a throwback to the bad ending in Help Wanted 1. Meanwhile, the secret ending shows us that Mimic's eye color depends on which personality he copies. We can also guess that Mimic's anger after Cassie tells him he is not Gregory could be a result of how Edwin and Mimic Fiona treated him. Mimic Fiona tried to make him to be David, while Edwin has beaten him for that and told him not to be David. And now the Mimic just doesn't want to hear anyone tell him who he is or isn't. This also matches the fact that in Ruin we can see that the Mimic has torn off the spot which we used in the secret ending to reprogram him. Speaking of Ruin, after Secret of the Mimic we finally know the origins of Mixes, and it gives us an interesting possibility for Ruin's elevator ending. Before that there were only two candidates who could drop the elevator, Mimic and Gregory. But now we have a theory that it could have been Mixes, aka M1, aka Mimic Fiona.
Edwin, it's me.
Cassie, it's me.
It followed you.
But we can't risk being followed.
Additionally, when talking to Cassie, someone watches her through a camera, just like Mimic Fiona was watching Arnold. It has been theorized that what Cassie deactivated was only Cradle-XZ, and when that happened it woken up Mimic Fiona. It is a fun theory, but let's get to the point. What actually was the secret of the Mimic? There are several possible answers for that, but the most likely one is that the Mimic is split in two, and metaphorically this is shown in the Moon-XZ game. The first one is M1, Mimic Fiona, who accumulated all the warmth and light. She is the sun. And the other one is M2, the Mimic, who was born when Edwin's mental state began to decline. He accumulated the darkness, grief and anger. He is the moon. So what does this mean for the future? Well, I can take a wild guess, as we already had a very similar situation in Ruin. The daycare attendant was split into two personalities, Sun and Moon, that were clearly making life harder for each other. In Ruin, Cassie fused them into one character, making them whole. The story of the Mimic implies that Mimic cannot be defeated with violence, and Cassie seems like a perfect candidate to defeat him peacefully. God, I dislike this idea so much. No, I do not think Mimic deserves a peaceful resolution after everything he has done to an enormous amount of characters, be it humans or animatronics. And he clearly embraced the violent, sadistic side of his life. But most likely defeating him with friendship is gonna be one of the options. Okay, what's next? Oh, now we've got to the spicy topic. Before Secret of the Mimic, we were suffering from the confusion about what Burntrap and Glitchtrap are. But after Secret of the Mimic, we gained some new kind of confusion. Confusion of what the fuck is actually canon. Before this game came out, the approximate timeline looked like this. We had one blind spot in the story right after the Mimic. It is the spot that Edwin was referring to, when he said it was happening again in the Storyteller. It was assumed that Secret of the Mimic would fill this spot and all the puzzle pieces would fall in place. Of course, that's not what happened. Secret of the Mimic replaced this part, while leaving an empty spot about Hellfest somewhere behind it, leaving an empty spot after it about how Phasm Entertainment got their hands on the Mimic, and it also shook the foundation of Tales, so a big chunk of events right before Security Breach are also under a question mark. If the Mimic story didn't happen and also Edwin presumably died, does it mean that the Storyteller doesn't happen at all? Tiger Rock? Nexi? Okay, these stories have a low priority. But what about GGY? Or epilogues? These stories lead us directly to Security Breach and Ruin. We know GGY happens in the games. Gregory was clearly GGY, he clearly hacked the arcades, therapists definitely went missing, and animatronics have Glitchtrap's code he uploaded. We are also being set back in our understanding why Gregory was chosen by the Mimic to begin with. If M2 was built after David's death and never knew him, he wouldn't actually search for a replacement. Of course, it still can be about David, but this theory needs some damage control now. It is also heavily implied the epilogues happen in the games. Mimic was delivered to the pizza place and it was sealed. The bottle that one of the workers left near the stage is still there. Help Wanted story also must happen, as it leads to the events of Help Wanted 1. But now, because of Secret of the Mimic, all these question marks appeared in places where they could have been easily avoided. The most reasonable explanation is that Tales are now secondary canon, which means that the events in the stories happen, but if the game comes out and there are contradictions, then the game takes priority. Of course, it doesn't really explain why it needs to be this complicated to begin with, when the story is already complicated enough, but it is what it is. And the funniest part is that we have this note right here, that implies that the Mimic story from Tales could have been a false memory or a dream. It talks about how Fiona was expecting, which can be interpreted as expecting a child. And then there were complications, after which she lost consciousness. Intentional or not, but this is suspiciously similar to how Fiona died in Tales. What is actually happening here? And remember, I'm ranting here only about the Mimic's lore, while Secret of the Mimic also introduces some things to the Afton's lore, like David's room looking like FNAF 4 bedroom, Edwin creating spring-lock suits, and so on. So when someone says that they don't like the story this game has given to us, there can be plenty of different reasons for that. It is not about the story not taking the direction people wanted. It is about the story not taking the direction it was already taken. Where do we go from here? No idea. If Secret of the Mimic gets a DLC, we could see what happened at Fall Fest or how Phasma Entertainment catched the Mimic, so at least one hole in this story can be filled. Maybe Megacat or someone else will make a storyteller or GGY game and retell their stories to account for Secret of the Mimic. I doubt Steelwool will do any game like this, in fact I hope they won't, otherwise we can be revisiting all the stories for the next 10 years, and I'd rather them to push the narrative forward. But that's enough of yapping for today, and that's all that we know about the Mimic. Thank you for watching. Press like and subscribe if you like this video, watch another one if you want to. Good luck and I'll see you again soon.